Ethan sat at his desk, a soft hum from his computer filling the air as he glanced between the screen and his phone. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting a golden hue over his cluttered workspace. He scrolled idly through the dating app, absent-mindedly flipping past profiles, not expecting much. He wasn't looking for anything serious. It was just a way to kill time, to distract himself after the long, grueling days at work. His thumb hovered over the screen, his finger poised to swipe left when his eyes caught something, a notification. A match. Sarah. The name flashed on his screen, and a small, intrigued smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't expected this. They had shared interests, films, books, music. A perfect match, it seemed. His thumb swiped up to open the message she'd sent. "Hey, I see we both love The Wire." Ethan chuckled softly to himself. The Wire. A show that had consumed a chunk of his free time over the last few months. It was a deep connection, one that meant more than just a fleeting shared interest. He leaned back in his chair, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The conversation seemed to start itself, effortless, as if they'd known each other for years. A few quick exchanges, filled with banter and laughter, and Ethan felt a spark of excitement. It wasn't supposed to feel like this, he thought, but it did. Something about her voice on the other side of the screen, those carefully chosen words, felt real. He put his phone down, took a deep breath, and let his mind drift to what the next step would be. A date. Maybe he'd meet her at that small cafe near his office, the one he frequented every morning. Ethan stood outside the cafe, nervously adjusting the collar of his shirt. His mind buzzed with expectations, each moment that passed heightening his anticipation. He pushed open the door, stepping inside and scanning the room. The familiar clink of cups and the murmur of conversation greeted him, but he was focused on one thing, finding Sarah. There, sitting at a table by the window, was a woman who looked effortlessly chic, her hair cascading over her shoulders as she fiddled with her phone. Her presence filled the room with a quiet, magnetic energy, drawing his gaze. She looked up as he approached, and their eyes met across the room. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips, and for a split second, Ethan's breath caught in his chest. He couldn't place it, but something about her made the room feel smaller, more intimate. "Ethan," she asked, her voice melodic, her eyes brightening. "Sarah," he responded, his voice betraying his nerves. She smiled, her eyes gleaming with recognition. "I'm so glad we could finally meet." Ethan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, offering a smile in return. But as he settled in, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over him. He couldn't quite place it, but this moment, sitting here with her, felt oddly familiar. He shook it off, chalking it up to his nerves. But it lingered, that nagging sensation in the back of his mind, like he'd been in this exact situation before. Sarah greeted him warmly, and they quickly fell into easy conversation. She seemed natural, almost too natural, like she was completely comfortable. Her words flowed effortlessly, her laugh genuine and light. Ethan tried to focus on what she was saying, but the feeling of familiarity was hard to shake. Her smile, the way she tilted her head when she listened, it all felt predestined. As Sarah took a sip of her coffee, she casually said, "I remember you telling me about that cafe you always go to for your morning coffee. It's the one near your work, right?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He froze for a moment, his grip tightening around his own cup. "What?" he asked, his voice faltering. Sarah looked at him, eyebrows furrowing slightly in confusion. "The cafe. You mentioned it before, didn't you?" His mind raced. He had never told anyone that detail, least of all her. He hadn't even shared the name of the cafe with anyone recently. His gaze darted to the table, trying to mask the growing unease in his chest. I guess I must have mentioned it in passing," he said, forcing a smile. I must have been talking about it with someone else. But the unease refused to leave. The conversation continued, but his mind kept replaying the exchange. How could she know that? Later in their conversation, Sarah mentioned something else that made his stomach turn. You must have had a great time at the coast last weekend. The pictures looked amazing. Ethan froze. His pulse quickened, and his breath caught in his throat. He hadn't posted any pictures of his trip to the coast, nor had he told anyone where he was going. He could feel the sweat starting to form on the back of his neck. I didn't, he paused, his words sticking in his throat. How did you know that? Sarah's smile didn't falter. You must have gone on a spontaneous getaway, right? The photos were great. Ethan forced a smile, a chill running down his spine. Yeah, it was a spontaneous trip. The words felt hollow, a lie that tasted sour in his mouth. He couldn't shake the thought that something was terribly wrong. As the conversation continued, his unease only grew. Sarah's observations were starting to pile up, each one more intimate than the last. She casually remarked, I see you've been hitting the gym pretty hard lately. Is that why you've been so busy? His hands gripped his coffee cup, the warmth of the mug doing little to steady his shaking fingers. How does she know that? He hadn't shared his gym routine with anyone, certainly not with her. Yet, here she was, talking about it like it was common knowledge. Yeah, he replied, his voice tight. Just trying to stay in shape. The next few days felt like a blur of questions and creeping suspicion. Ethan found himself constantly checking his phone, waiting for the next message from Sarah. And when it came, it only deepened the unease that had been growing inside him. She sent him a message about a book he was reading, a book he hadn't discussed with anyone. How's that book? I've heard great things about it, she wrote. He stared at the message, his heart sinking. How could she know about the book? He hadn't shared it on social media, hadn't talked about it to anyone. Was it just a coincidence? Or was she following him, watching him? Ethan debated whether to confront her, but the fear of sounding paranoid kept him from acting. Maybe it's nothing, he thought. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But deep down, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. When they met again for their second date, Sarah had already picked the restaurant. As Ethan sat down, trying to mask his nervousness, she greeted him with, You must love the food here, right? It's one of your favorites. Ethan's hands went clammy. How did you know that? He asked, his voice slightly strained. Sarah laughed softly, a knowing glint in her eyes. I guess I'd just pay attention. Ethan felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. The polite smile he offered felt forced, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to get up and leave. But he didn't. He stayed, unable to escape the web she had so carefully woven around him. As they continued to talk, Sarah mentioned a movie Ethan had seen the week before, one that he hadn't discussed with anyone. She detailed parts of the plot, speaking with such casual knowledge that it unsettled him further. He felt trapped, like a rat in a cage, the walls closing in as she spoke. His thoughts raced. What is going on? He wanted to leave, to run, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Fear. Curiosity. Politeness. Whatever it was, it held him there. Sarah, Ethan said, his voice shaky as he set his drink down. How do you know so much about me? Sarah's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with a serene calmness that sent a chill down his spine. You're an easy person to get to know. I'm just paying attention. His heart slammed against his ribs as he processed her words. No, this isn't right. Something's wrong. Sarah leaned forward, her gaze locking onto his. I've been following you for weeks, she said, her voice soft but chilling. I know where you go, what you do, when you're there. I know you better than anyone else. Ethan's blood ran cold. His mind raced to make sense of her confession, but it was too late. The truth had been laid bare, and all he could do was stare at her, horrified. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah's smile never wavered. "I've been gathering information from your social media. Watching you. We're meant to be together, Ethan." Ethan's legs trembled beneath him as he stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. His voice cracked as he shouted, "You need to leave me alone." He took a step back, his body filled with a raw, panicked energy as he backed away toward the door. Sarah didn't move. She remained seated, her expression disturbingly calm. "But we're perfect for each other. You'll see," she said, her voice a strange mix of affection and finality. Ethan's stomach churned. He couldn't take it anymore. He turned and rushed out of the cafe, the door slamming shut behind him. As he stepped onto the street, his heart pounded in his chest, and the image of Sarah's unsettling smile burned into his mind. Her voice called after him softly. "I know you better than anyone else." The words lingered in the air, a cold, ghostly echo that would haunt him long after he had fled. Ethan sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen reflecting off his tired eyes. The soft hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the room as he absent-mindedly scrolled through his work email. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying every word, every moment of his encounter with Sarah. His heart still raced, a nervous energy he couldn't shake. He felt like he was being suffocated by it all. He glanced at his phone, which lay on the table beside him, vibrating with a new notification. A chill ran through him. He wasn't ready for this. Not again. He stared at the phone, the pulse in his temples growing stronger. After a few seconds, he unlocked it, his thumb hovering over the screen. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Sarah had already gone too far. He couldn't let this continue. Not like this. He opened her profile, his thumb shaking as he hovered over the block option. This will stop it, he thought. The words sounded hollow, like a reassurance he was trying to force into his mind. He blocked her account. The moment the action was confirmed, Ethan felt an odd emptiness settle into his chest. Was it relief? Or was it just the dread of what might come next? He didn't know. His mind raced as his hand dropped limply by his side. Will this make a difference? He swallowed, trying to quell the rising sense of panic that surged within him. It wasn't over. He knew it wasn't over. The next day, Ethan pushed through the doors of his gym, his thoughts scattered as his feet carried him to the treadmill. The rhythmic thud of his feet against the rubber belt seemed to synchronize with the beating of his heart. His mind was still trapped in the same spiral of fear, anxiety, and confusion. He set the machine to a faster pace, desperate to outrun the thoughts swirling in his head. But the harder he ran, the more his paranoia intensified. Every breath he took felt labored, strained. Is she here? The thought came unbidden, like a shadow lurking just behind him. He glanced around, his eyes darting over the rows of equipment, searching for any sign of Sarah. The gym was crowded, but for a moment, everything seemed to blur into the background. A cold, tight feeling settled in his chest. And then, in the corner of his eye, he saw her. His breath caught in his throat. Across the room, standing near the free weights, was a woman with dark hair and a familiar figure. His heart hammered. It's her. He couldn't be sure, but the instant recognition sent a wave of panic through his veins. He looked away quickly, trying to focus on the treadmill. It's just my mind playing tricks, he told himself. But it was impossible to shake the feeling. He glanced up again, his eyes searching the gym. A figure moved, and for a moment, he could have sworn it was Sarah, making her way toward him. His stomach twisted. His legs felt like lead, but he pushed himself harder, faster, trying to burn off the dread that clung to him like a second skin. But the feeling of being watched never went away. The rest of the workout was a blur, a haze of anxiety and fear. No matter how fast he ran, the sense that he wasn't alone, that someone was always lurking nearby, wouldn't let go. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked toward his usual cafe. His feet dragged as he approached the familiar doors, his thoughts racing. Am I being paranoid? The question seemed to repeat in his mind, bouncing around like a broken record. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, but the moment he reached the counter, he froze. There she was. Sarah. Sitting at the same corner booth, her eyes hidden behind a book, but the way her gaze flicked over the top of the pages told him everything he needed to know. She was watching him. His stomach churned. His mind screamed at him to turn around, to leave, but his body betrayed him. He ordered his coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he dug for his wallet. He could feel her eyes on him, the weight of her gaze pressing down on him like a physical thing. He grabbed his coffee and walked out, keeping his expression neutral, pretending like everything was normal. He glanced back as he stepped outside, half expecting her to be following him. But she was gone. For a moment, relief washed over him, but the unease still lingered. Had she been following me? His thoughts were a mess, an endless loop of suspicion and paranoia. That evening, Ethan found himself sitting in his apartment, the city's noise filtering through the window. He stared at his phone, his thoughts consuming him. He couldn't let it go. It was like a fire inside him, burning through every rational thought. How is she finding me? He couldn't understand how she had tracked him so easily. With a deep sigh, he sat back and scrolled through his social media accounts. His fingers moved almost mechanically, adjusting his privacy settings, deleting posts, blocking Sarah on every platform. He locked down every possible avenue of access to his life. But even as he clicked through each setting, the doubts remained. Will this be enough? It didn't feel like enough. Nothing ever did anymore. The next morning, Ethan arrived at his office building, his steps quick but heavy. His thoughts were clouded with the dread of the day ahead. He had hoped that blocking Sarah would stop her, but the nagging fear was still there. He couldn't shake it. As he approached the entrance to the building, he noticed a woman standing across the street. She was too far away to be sure, but something about her posture seemed off. She was watching him, standing perfectly still. Ethan's breath hitched. It's her. For a moment, he froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't tell if it was her or not, but the thought lodged itself in his mind, taking root. He stood there for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. No. It can't be. With a shaky breath, he forced himself to walk into the building, trying to ignore the feeling that she was still watching him. He glanced over his shoulder, locking eyes with the figure for just a moment before he stepped inside. He couldn't tell if he was imagining it or not. But the fear was real. Later that night, Ethan sat in his apartment, the lights dimmed, the hum of the city outside barely noticeable. He stared at the phone, trying to focus on the work emails piling up in his inbox. But his mind wouldn't settle. Every sound, every movement outside his window had him on edge. A knock at the door. A rustle in the hallway. His pulse quickened. His phone buzzed. Another notification. He snatched it up, his heart racing in his chest. But it wasn't from Sarah. It was just an update from his work. A small, fleeting moment of relief. But it didn't last. The fear remained, gnawing at him from the inside. He hadn't realized how much it had taken over his life until now. He felt like he was losing control, like his grip on reality was slipping. Was it just his mind? Was he really being watched? Or was he just losing it? Frustration and fear built inside Ethan like a rising tide. He couldn't take it anymore. The next day, he walked into his usual cafe, determined to confront Sarah, to put an end to this madness. He scanned the room as he entered, his eyes quickly locking onto her. She was sitting at the corner booth, her gaze fixed on him as though she had been waiting for this moment. His pulse quickened. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to walk toward her. "Sarah," he said, his voice shaky but filled with anger and fear. "Stop following me. I don't want to see you again." Sarah's eyes flickered with something dark, something almost predatory. She didn't respond immediately, just watching him, the smile on her lips too calm, too serene. Finally, she spoke. "I'm just waiting for you to realize that we belong together." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He could feel the walls closing in on him, the air in the cafe suddenly too thick to breathe. Ethan stepped back, a mixture of anger and panic bubbling to the surface. "This isn't normal," he yelled, his voice rising. Sarah stood, stepping toward him with surprising force. She pushed Ethan's chest, sending him stumbling back a few steps. His heart raced. He caught his balance, shock and fear mixing in his veins. "Don't touch me!" he shouted. Sarah didn't flinch. Her face remained eerily calm. "You don't understand yet," she said softly, almost affectionately. Ethan turned, his heart pounding as he stormed out of the cafe, his mind reeling from the confrontation. He could feel her eyes on him as the door slammed behind him. The weight of her presence lingered, an ever-present shadow on his mind. He didn't know what to do anymore. But he had to get away. He had to escape. As Ethan stormed down the street, his mind was a blur of thoughts. He didn't know where he was going, but he had to leave. The fear was all-consuming. It was suffocating him. He turned a corner, his breathing erratic, and when he looked back, he saw her. Sarah's car. Right there. Sitting across the street. Unmistakable. She was following him. Right in front of him. His stomach twisted. His heart stopped. And in that moment, he realized he was trapped. Ethan stepped out of his apartment, the early morning air cool against his skin. His hand trembled as he fumbled for his keys, locking the door behind him. The world felt different now, more ominous, as if every corner hid something waiting to consume him. His footsteps echoed in the quiet parking lot, the sound unnaturally loud in his ears. The rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant hum of traffic, everything felt amplified, as if the world had become a cacophony of noise. Each sound made him jump, his nerves frayed, stretched thin from the constant unease. He glanced over his shoulder, the fear of being watched gnawing at him like a parasite. Nothing seemed out of place. The parking lot was empty, the same as every other day. Still, the unsettling feeling tightened in his chest, refusing to let go. He hurried toward his car, eyes scanning the space around him one more time before he quickly locked the door, feeling a brief sense of security wash over him. But it didn't last. At work, Ethan sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The software of his computer was almost comforting, but his thoughts were miles away. His eyes darted around the office, catching glimpses of people moving about, but it was as if they were all staring at him, their gazes heavy with judgment. The air felt thicker, more suffocating, and his chest tightened with every passing second. He tried to focus on the screen, but the words blurred together, and the cursor blinked at him mockingly. "Is she watching me right now?" The thought crept into his mind, relentless, gnawing at him. Every sound, every conversation, felt like it was directed at him. He could almost hear her footsteps behind him, feel her presence like a shadow over his shoulder. "Ethan, everything okay?" His co-worker, Linda, stood by his desk, her eyes concerned. Ethan forced a smile, the expression feeling foreign on his face. "Yeah, just tired," he said, the words leaving his mouth too quickly, too stiffly. He tried to act casual, But Linda's gaze lingered on him, searching, as if she could see through the thin veil he'd put up. Right. Well, let me know if you need anything, she said, before walking away, leaving him to face the desk and the growing knot in his stomach. Once she was gone, Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped the mouse, but no amount of physical movement could push the cold terror settling deep in his bones. She's watching me, he thought again, his mind slipping into the same spiral. He couldn't escape it. The fear had taken root, and it was spreading, creeping into every part of his life. That evening, Ethan met his best friend, James, at a local bar. The familiar clink of glasses and the murmur of voices around him did little to soothe his nerves. He sat at the table, his eyes flicking around the room, unable to relax. James noticed immediately. "Dude, what's going on with you? You've been acting weird for weeks now," James said, his voice low, a touch of concern in his tone. Ethan looked up, forcing a smile, but it felt strained, too thin to be convincing. "Just tired, man. Nothing to worry about," he replied, laughing awkwardly, hoping James would drop it. But James didn't seem convinced. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, studying Ethan carefully. "You sure? Because, man, you've been twitchy, checking your phone every few minutes." "You don't look like you're okay," James said, his voice edged with genuine worry. Ethan's stomach twisted. He shifted in his seat, the unease rising in his chest again. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. How could he explain? How could he tell James that he was terrified of a woman who seemed to know his every move? "I'm fine, James." "Really? Just stressed out with work and stuff," Ethan said, trying to sound convincing. He managed to laugh again, but it felt hollow. James wasn't fooled. "All right, man. But you know I'm here if you need to talk," James said, leaning back in his chair. Ethan nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, his heart felt heavy. He knew James didn't believe him, and that made everything worse. Later that night, Ethan found himself pacing in his apartment, unable to sit still. His thoughts were a storm, each one more frantic than the last. What was happening to him? Was he going crazy? In a fit of desperation, he decided to go to the police. Maybe, just maybe, someone would listen to him. Maybe he wasn't losing his mind. He arrived at the station, the fluorescent lights above flickering as he approached the desk. The officer behind the counter looked up, raising an eyebrow at Ethan's disheveled appearance. I need to report something," Ethan stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. The officer nodded, gesturing for him to continue. "There's a woman. She's been following me. Stalking me," Ethan said, his words rushed, tumbling out in a frantic spill. "Her name is Sarah. She knows everything about me. She's been watching me." His voice faltered as the words left his mouth. How ridiculous did it sound? How paranoid? The officer looked at him for a long moment, his expression neutral, before he raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you've been stalked by a woman you just met?" "This sounds like paranoia," the officer said, his tone dismissive. Ethan's heart dropped. He tried to hold on to his composure, but it was slipping fast. "No. I'm serious," Ethan insisted, his voice rising slightly. "I'm not making this up." "She's been," the officer cut him off with a raised hand. "Look, we can't do much unless you have something concrete. You said she was stalking you, but you don't have any proof. If she hasn't physically harmed you or broken the law, then it's just a he said she said situation." Ethan's stomach churned. He opened his mouth to argue, but the officer was already typing something into his computer. "Just take it easy, all right? Maybe you're just stressed. I'm going to have to ask you to leave now." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his mind reeling. Nobody believed him. Nobody cared. That evening, Ethan sat at his computer, the blue glow of the screen harsh in the dim apartment. His fingers shook as he scrolled through the listings of private investigators. This was his last option. He clicked on the first listing with positive reviews, his hope barely a flicker in his chest. He called the number, his heart pounding in his ears as he waited for the line to pick up. "I'll take care of it," the investigator said calmly when Ethan finally spoke. The reassurance in the man's voice brought a slight relief, but it didn't last long. What if it wasn't enough? What if Sarah was already one step ahead of him? Ethan hung up the phone, a small spark of hope igniting deep in his chest. Maybe this was the way out. Maybe this nightmare could finally end. Later that night, Ethan was lost in thought when the knock came. His heart stopped. The knock sounded again, louder this time, echoing through the apartment. Ethan's blood ran cold. He knew who it was. He felt it in his bones. Slowly, he stood, his legs shaky as he approached the door. When he opened it, Sarah stood there, her unsettling smile stretching wide across her face. "I've been waiting for you, Ethan," she said softly, stepping into his apartment before he could react. Her presence was like ice, freezing the air around her. Ethan stepped back, panic surging through his veins. No, no, no. He had to get her out. He had to stop this. "Sarah, get out of my apartment," he shouted, his voice raw with fear. But she didn't flinch. "You don't understand, Ethan," she said, her voice sweet, almost like a lullaby. "We're meant to be together. I know you better than anyone." Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped toward her, pushing her back with his hands. But she was surprisingly strong, her grip tightening around his arms as she resisted. Her nails dug into his skin, and pain shot through him, but he didn't stop. With every ounce of strength, he shoved her toward the door. "Leave me alone," he yelled, his voice shaking. For a moment, Sarah's expression faltered, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. But it was fleeting. The moment she regained her composure, she simply smiled, as though she were enjoying the struggle. Ethan slammed the door shut behind her with a loud bang. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath ragged. He leaned against the door, trying to steady himself. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his face. What the hell am I going to do now? A few days later, Ethan's phone buzzed. His hands shook as he reached for it. The email from the investigator was simple, but the words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Sarah has been linked to several other stalking cases in other cities. There's a history of her targeting men who seem vulnerable, and she's done this before." Ethan's blood ran cold as he read it again. This was worse than he thought. But then came the chilling revelation: she's also been living next door to you for the past few months, in the apartment building right next to yours. Ethan's stomach churned. She had been this close all along. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, his mind replayed the nightmare over and over. Every flicker of the street light outside, every creak of the floorboard seemed to be a sign, an omen that she was still out there. He stood up, unable to rest, and walked to the window. His eyes locked on the apartment building next door, and the sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Across the courtyard, in the window of the apartment right next to his, Sarah stood. Her gaze was fixed on him, her face expressionless, as if she had been waiting for him to notice. Ethan froze. He backed away from the window slowly, his chest tightening with terror. She had been watching him all this time. Ethan's hands shook as he grabbed his phone, dialing the investigator's number again, but it went unanswered. He felt completely alone. Trapped. The walls of his apartment seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with their weight. He glanced at the door, half expecting Sarah to come barging through at any moment. But there was nothing. No sound. Just silence. Ethan paced back and forth, his mind a whirlwind of panic. How could he escape? Where could he go? Every option felt impossible. She was everywhere. He was trapped, and there was nowhere to run. The fear tightened around him, choking the breath from his lungs. Ethan stares at the piles of clothes and personal belongings scattered across his apartment. His movements are mechanical as he stuffs clothes into an old duffel bag, his eyes glazed over in a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Every sound, every movement in the hallway outside sends his heart racing. He wants to leave, to escape this nightmare, but the constant paranoia makes it feel impossible. As he picks up a photograph of his family, his hand shakes violently. He knows he can't stay here anymore. The walls feel like they're closing in around him, suffocating him. Just as Ethan is about to finish packing, his phone buzzes with a new notification. His heart stops when he sees it's from an unknown number. He opens the message with trembling fingers. The text is short, chilling, "I'm not done with you yet." Ethan stares at the screen for several seconds, his blood running cold. The words seem to echo in his head as the overwhelming fear and despair rush over him. She's still here. She's never going to stop. Panic sets in, but Ethan forces himself to take control. He opens his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he uses his tech skills to track Sarah's movements. His eyes dart from the screen to the window, constantly checking for any signs of her. He taps into public surveillance cameras, reviewing footage of the street outside his apartment building, hoping for any clue. With each passing minute, the tension builds, but Ethan remains focused. He makes a plan, setting up decoys to mislead Sarah and create a few false leads. The following days were a blur of frantic searching and tech work. Ethan, always meticulous, used every resource at his disposal, including his deep knowledge of technology, to track Sarah's every move. His fingers danced across his keyboard, piecing together traces of her digital footprint. The dread in his chest only grew as he began to uncover more hidden accounts, encrypted messages, and patterns he hadn't noticed before. She had been watching him, planning every move, manipulating his life with precision. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot from hours of staring at the screen, but he pressed on, knowing this was his only chance. He set up decoys, planting false information to lead her astray, hoping to catch her in the act. His paranoia was no longer just a nagging feeling, it had become a constant companion. Each time he glanced over his shoulder, each time he checked his phone, he half expected a message from Sarah, a reminder that she was never far away. But as the days passed, the tension slowly began to ease. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Ethan had something now. He had evidence. He had something concrete to show the police. The private investigator he had hired had come through, providing the final piece of the puzzle. Sarah was linked to several other stalking cases in other cities, and the proof was undeniable. She had left a trail of victims in her wake, and now, Ethan had the evidence to take her down. The fear still lingered, clinging to him like a second skin, but he had a plan. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan had control. The police were slow to act, but with the investigators' help, Ethan was able to push them into motion. He stood by, shaking, as they gathered the evidence, ready to confront Sarah. He didn't know if he was ready for this, he didn't know if he would ever be ready, but it had to happen. He couldn't keep running. When Sarah was arrested, Ethan felt a momentary relief. It was over, at least for now. The police had taken her away, her face a blank mask as they led her out of the apartment building. The weight that had pressed down on Ethan's chest for so long seemed to lift, and he allowed himself a moment of peace. But even as Sarah was hauled away, Ethan knew the damage to his life was irreparable. He had been torn apart, piece by piece, by the woman who had stalked him for months. She had embedded herself into his life so thoroughly that even her absence felt like a presence, an ominous shadow lingering just out of reach. He couldn't erase what had happened, couldn't undo the terror she had instilled in him. He left the city the next day, taking the first opportunity to escape. A new apartment, a new life. He hoped the change would bring peace. But the fear never fully left him. Months passed, and for a time, things were quiet. Ethan settled into his new apartment, his life taking on a semblance of normalcy. He had changed his routine, altered his habits, done everything he could to put the past behind him. But no matter how much he tried to bury the memory of Sarah's obsession, it remained in the corners of his mind, lurking, waiting to resurface. Then, one afternoon, Ethan returned home from work, his mind preoccupied with the usual daily grind. He walked into his apartment and immediately noticed something was off. The air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. He glanced around the room, but nothing seemed out of place. He set his bag down on the couch and moved to the kitchen, but a nagging sense of unease refused to leave him. It wasn't until he checked his mail that the dread truly set in. There, nestled between a stack of bills and advertisements, was a small, nondescript package. No return address. Just his name written in block letters. His heart skipped a beat as he tore open the envelope. Inside was a photograph. A picture of his new apartment building, taken from across the street. He could see the front entrance, the familiar street lamp near the curb, the same parking lot he had parked in every day. But it was the note on the back that made his stomach turn. "I'm still watching." Ethan's blood ran cold. His breath caught in his throat as he stared at the words, a chill crawling down his spine. It was happening again. She was still out there. Still watching him. The photograph slipped from his fingers, falling to the floor with a soft thud. Ethan's hands shook as he crouched down to pick it up. The reality of the situation hit him with full force. No matter where he went, no matter how far he ran, Sarah's presence would always linger. He wasn't free. He was never going to be free. Ethan sank down onto the couch, his head in his hands. The weight of the message crushed him, the crushing realization that he was trapped again. That Sarah's obsession had never truly left him. He had moved, changed his life, but she had been watching, waiting for him to let his guard down. He wasn't safe. Not here. Not anywhere.